This weekend, our nation tries to pause and reflect upon the person and teachings of Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. King believed in us even more than we tend to believe in ourselves. He could see a beloved community, as he called it, of all peoples and nations and tribes. He could see that human beings could transcend their prejudices and their fears, and they could expand their tribe to include the other who does not look like me, the other who does not come out of my own culture or my own way of doing things. King role modeled a generous spirit even as he lived with this backbone of steel. The beloved community was not the result of warm, fuzzy feeling. The beloved community was a necessity of justice, where, in the words of Jesus, the poor are included by hearing good news, and the blind are included and given new sight, and the imprisoned are included by being released from their punishments, and the oppressed are included by having the heavy weight lifted off their life. And a jubilee is proclaimed, offering Sabbath rest for the land and the release of debt for those who struggle, those who are overwhelmed by the economic system. All of this was the inclusive invitation to come and feast at the table of our Lord, a table where all are invited and welcomed into something new. Martin Luther King was a prophet who role modeled how to live into that something new, how to live animated by the exact same spirit that animated Jesus. In the midst of our weary world, this weekend is a hopeful pause so that we might remember that God has not left us without a witness. God has not left us without ideas of how to change our ways. God has not left us without a vision of a better way to live, and a better way to structure society, and a better way to be the church, and a better way to be human beings, who, after all, are temples where heaven might touch the earth. The Apostle Paul had the same vision. Gentiles and Jews in his day were completely segregated and hostile towards each other. It was no different than the apartheid of South Africa or the apartheid of our own history, think 1940s Georgia. We tend to see ourselves within our own tribal structure, no matter what that structure is: red, blue, housed, homeless, employed, unemployed, wealthy, struggling, and of course all of the ethnic differences, all of the gender differences. Rather than to see ourselves enfolded within the embrace of each other, we tend to be a bit afraid of each other. Like Adam and Eve, we want to hide. The vision of a beloved community is always a politically, culturally, spiritually radical revolution, because it's not normal. All one needs do is pay attention, even for a moment, to know that we need today this beloved revolution. If we're going to survive what seems to me to be the inevitable violence and hostility that is heating up, waiting for an explosion, perhaps around the time of our next election. The gospel, the good news that Jesus brings, is that God is all in all, that there's always a table with an abundant feast, and there's always an available chair, and there's always room for one more. God is the spirit of ever-expanding love, a circle that's always whirling and adding someone else to the dance. The question is, are you personally a circle of ever-expanding love, whirling and inviting others into your dance? Are you that person? And that's a hard question. Even the best of us tend to be tribal. In other words, we'll dance with our own, but with those others, not so much. For example, there's a really nice seafood restaurant in the neighborhood where I live. But it leaked out that a group of Proud Boys were meeting there every Wednesday night. And then it came out that the owner's son, who at that time was actually helping to run the restaurant, was the leader of this particular faction. And a couple of months later, this guy was arrested at the attempted coup on January 6th. I'm not so sure I want to dance with him. As a matter of fact, when it first came out that the Proud Boys were holding meetings at the restaurant, I joined others in the neighborhood and to have a boycott to stop eating there. See what I mean? Loving the other, the real other, the one that isn't like you, is hard. Will Campbell was a legendary white preacher in the South back in the 50s and the 60s. At some danger to himself, he advocated for the emerging civil rights movement in Mississippi. And he was called, as you can imagine, a race traitor. His advocacy wasn't just words. It was also organizing and marching and provoking and agitating so that black folk could have a seat at the table. But Campbell was a follower of Jesus, not a follower of ideology. Through a series of events, he found himself in a situation of needing to be a pastor for a white Ku Klux Klaner. And through this experience, Campbell kind of had an inner conversion. And he began to hang out with blatantly unrepentant white supremacists, his neighbors in Mississippi. As a preacher, he married and buried and baptized and preached and taught and served Eucharist, not as a compromise, not as an accommodation, but as a follower of the open table, so open that Will Campbell, well-known civil rights activist, also was Will Campbell, lover of his own southern white supremacist tribe, right there in Mississippi. Persons, even white supremacists, were more important to him than self-righteousness. That's hard. What will your friends think if they find out that you have unvaccinated, ivermectin-taking Christian nationalist neighbors over to dinner tonight? Or maybe what we should be asking is, how come we don't have any unvaccinated, ivermectin-taking Christian nationalist friends? Especially since there's so many of them. Can one be a follower of Jesus and not hang out with your enemy? Or at least who you think is your enemy? This came home to me back in the 80s when I went to Washington, D.C. to protest Reagan's policies in Central America. And there I was sitting on the sidewalk across the street from the White House, which you could do in those days, when suddenly an inner voice spoke powerfully to me, within me. And the voice said, I have no right to protest Reagan's policies until I love Ronald Reagan. And it completely unnerved me, and it scared me. Because who am I if I'm not the righteous one, standing up courageously against evil? God spoke to me that day, and I'm still trying to live out the challenge that God spoke to me about. Love is hard. Dancing with the enemy is hard. Keeping an open chair at your open table is hard. Aspirations are easy. The vision is easy. But the personal practice of your aspiration requires a courage and a power greater than yourself. I've always pretty much had a liberal spirit. Just something I've had. For example, it's easy for me to love poor people abstractly. But what happens in the day-to-day, in the personal? I remembered how repulsed I was when I helped Dave move out of his hovel when he could no longer pay the rent. The sink stunk with plates and food and maggots crawling all over the sink and around the sink. And I remember opening up his little girl, she was about 8, 9 years old, opening up his little girl's dresser to grab her clothes and to pack them, and found cat droppings all in the drawer. And the bathroom almost made me vomit. And I was so angry. I was so mad at him. Because you can be poor, but you don't have to live poor. And I was angry that Dave would allow himself to become so disgusting and so filthy and so repulsive, and that he could do that to his daughter as well. Invite him to my dance. Invite him into my house. Hang out with him. Be seen with him. Loving in the abstract is easy. Loving face to face, in the personal, is hard because it's unnatural. I'm talking about love, not tolerance. Love is genuine care. It's being delighted by the one that you love. Love is a deep desire for Dave's well-being, so much so that I'm willing to sacrifice. I'm willing to suffer so that he might be freed from whatever demons that have infected him. That's hard. That's not normal. The gospel of Jesus is not easy, and it's not normal. It's normal to love your tribe and to make everyone outside your tribe prove themselves worthy of your trust and friendship. That's what normal is. Normal is to think that you're the norm, and everyone needs to live up to that norm. The Apostle Paul bridged this gap by going out among them. That is, Paul the Jew hung out with Gentiles. Just as Jesus, the eternal Word, took on flesh, pitched tent, lived among us. Just like Will Campbell refused to abandon his own people no matter how ugly they had become. And just like King, who offered up his life as a sacrifice of love for that which is greater, that which is more real. How about you? Who are the enemies in your life who you personally know and love, no matter what? What are their names? Can you see their faces? Love is hard. It isn't normal. It's not easy. It requires the supernatural. It requires a power greater than yourself, because anyone can love their own tribe, and that's hard enough. But to love the other, to love the enemy, that requires the Holy Spirit. But God will help you if you want to try. Maybe the first step is to confess. A while back, I was the pastor of a downtown church in Spokane, and I came to the painful realization that I was a racist. As a liberal, being a racist is the lowest of the low. It's nothing but shameful. But in those days, I spent a lot of time on the street. I knew a lot of the street kids. I knew most of the street drunks and abusers. And I think I was a bit self-righteous, thinking how cool I was because I knew all these people, these poor people. But over time, I came to see that there was a particular group of people who angered me. I could feel it in my body every time I saw them. They repulsed me, and I had no compassion for them. And I finally confessed this out loud to a group that I prayed with, and that's important. If sins are to be confessed rather than just spewed out, one needs a group of people who care for you, who love you despite yourself. I confessed to them that I was disgusted by all the drunk natives who just set me off just by seeing them. Drunk white guys, I had compassion for. Drunk black folk, I had compassion for. The drunk natives, just rage boiled up in me. The week I confessed this was Holy Week. And on Good Friday night, we had a service in the sanctuary. And in the middle of the service, the holy service, 2 drunk natives staggered into the sanctuary, and they stood before the pulpit where I was doing my holy work. And with arms outstretched and tears falling from their eyes, they howled out, "We need help!" Tony, a street drunk, a native, had been shot that day. Tony was their cousin. I knew Tony. But this was in the middle of the service. And yet, was not this the service? Was this not the point of Holy Week? And immediately a couple of saints, ordinary saints, came up to wrap their arms around the 2 and offer care and compassion and comfort and prayers. And we had a parish nurse at the time, and she came up and was able to finish the liturgy, and I was able to go and to be with the 2 men. And we all wound up crying together and praying together and moaning together. And it was being together in the midst of their crucifixion, especially when I couldn't fix it. That's when I realized that God had sent me, that night at least, the means of my own liberation. It is not our thoughts or our good intentions or our aspirations that save us. Only personal relationships save us. Only word becomes flesh saves us. Only pitching tent in the midst of others saves us. Only the courage to love one's supremacist neighbors save us. Only red and blue together will save us. Only the courageous, gentle touch of ordinary saints when we ourselves are repulsive and disgusting will save us. The gospel is hard, but it's good. Only when self-righteous pastors and drunk natives feed each other can the beloved community emerge. Only when enemies embrace can the beloved community evolve from an idea into reality. Only those willing to be broken can become whole. The gospel is hard, but it's good. Loving our enemies is hard, but it is what will save us. To love who we think is unlovable helps us overcome the fear that the other will overwhelm us. It helps us endure the pain that has hurt us. It helps us overlook what repulses us so we can see the possibility of what might unite us. Loving our enemies requires from us the willingness, the humility to confess our own shadow, that we all got something. But that confession breaks our heart open, and it allows us to be loved, not tolerated. Loved is just who we are. And that, in turn, gives us the courage to act when God, who hears our confession, sends us the means of our liberation. The gospel is hard, but where else can we go to find hope from the repetitive violence of Eden's curse? Jesus and Paul and King and Will Campbell have tried to teach us about the salvation of loving our enemies. It's hard, but it's good. I want to end with a prayer by Howard Thurman, a spiritual mentor to both King and the civil rights movement. Let us make his prayer our own. O holy God, open unto me light for my darkness, courage for my fear, hope for my despair. O loving God, open unto me wisdom for my confusion, forgiveness for my sins, love for my hate. O God of peace, open unto me peace for my turmoil, joy for my sorrow, strength for my weakness. O generous God, open my heart to receive all your gifts. Amen. We're going to sing hymn number 519, which is often thought of as the national anthem of the civil rights movement.